The palace tried to whisper it, but the whisper detonated like a bomb. 5 minutes ago, the world learned that Prince William didn't just inherit a private estate. He inherited Queen Elizabeth II's most guarded secret fortress, and Camilla's family was shut out completely. It began with a calm, almost clinical 2-paragraph statement released from Buckingham Palace on February 3, 2026. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just ink on paper. But inside those controlled lines was a revelation that split royal households down the middle. William had been named the sole beneficiary of one of the most secretive estates in modern royal history. Not Balmoral, not Sandringham, not Windsor. Something older. Something hidden. Something Queen Elizabeth II had buried in silence for decades. They called it the Cedar Estate. And the moment Camilla and her son Tom Parker Bowles realized what had been transferred, and more importantly, what had been deliberately kept from them, the temperature behind palace doors reportedly dropped 10 degrees. Staff who had survived abdications, scandals, televised confessions, and family fractures described the atmosphere that morning as unlike anything in a generation. Because this wasn't just land. This was the Queen's final chess move. To understand the explosion, you have to go back. Not to 2026, but to 1944. Wartime Britain. Bombs falling. Futures uncertain. King George VI quietly purchased an estate deep within the Chiltern Hills, straddling Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. No registry fanfare, no press leaks, no ceremonial unveiling. It was designed to disappear from public knowledge the moment it was acquired. For over 80 years, the Cedar Estate existed like a ghost, whispered about only among the most senior courtiers. Why keep something hidden that long? Because what it contained was not just history. It was unfiltered memory. Inside that estate sat a private chapel, a memorial vault listing royal family members whose wartime contributions had remained classified for decades. Beneath reinforced steel archival chambers were 186 oak chests filled with private wartime correspondence, letters never filtered through government censors, never polished for public diplomacy. And then there were the 72 undisclosed royal portraits, raw oil paintings of King George VI during the Blitz, intimate depictions of Princess Margaret the public never saw. But the detail that sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles? 14 sealed audio recordings of Queen Elizabeth II, not speeches, not public addresses, but private dialogues with towering historical figures. Winston Churchill, Nelson Mandela, Ronald Reagan, Charles de Gaulle. This was not decor. This was not nostalgia. This was the monarchy's unmasked soul. An archivist once described the Cedar Collection as the raw, unfiltered architecture of royal memory. And that phrase lingers because it explains everything. The Cedar Estate was the part of the monarchy that did not belong to the state. Not taxpayer-funded, not subject to parliamentary oversight. It was the private spine of the crown. And here's where it becomes personal. Between 2017 and 2021, while the world was distracted by interviews, departures, global headlines, and brand reinventions, William was making quiet visits to this hidden sanctuary. No court circular entries. No press photographers. He arrived in nondescript vehicles, often with only one security officer, and inside those cedar groves, he walked with the Queen, not as a grandson seeking affection, but as a successor being evaluated. He cataloged naval dispatches, refiled wartime letters untouched for 70 years, repaired moisture control systems protecting vellum and oil canvases. Hundreds of hours in silence, no applause, no cameras, just stewardship, and the Queen watched. In a handwritten annotation found within the Covenant Trust documents, she wrote, "He will inherit more than the crown. He will inherit the silence that preserved it." That line wasn't poetic sentiment. It was a declaration, a bypass of everyone else in the line of succession. A legal fortress being built quietly while others were busy polishing public images. Because in 2020, the Queen created a private covenant trust under Charter Seal 0142, witnessed by only 3 individuals, designed with a delayed activation clause that would trigger only after 2 conditions were met: the conclusion of her state funeral and William's public recognition as heir to institutional responsibility. But on February 3rd, 2026, those conditions were satisfied. The estate passed to William in full exclusive guardianship. No shared management clauses. No negotiation windows. No loopholes. And that's when the fury began, because while William had been studying silence, others had been drafting visions. Camilla, insiders confirm, had been advocating for what she called a Windsor Cultural Legacy Center. Gourmet retreats, literary salons, heritage tours through the Cedar Groves. On paper, it sounded respectable, but beneath the surface? There were commercial blueprints. Tom Parker Bowles reportedly envisioned Michelin-grade restaurants inside the historic hunting lodge. An artisanal brand called Royal Wild, cedar-aged cheeses, estate honey, trout, Highland wines. Elite private club affairs. High-ticket hospitality under royal branding. For those who had guarded 80 years of secrets. This felt like sacrilege. Then came October 18th, 2025. A leaked briefing note revealing Tom's legal team had explored reclassifying portions of the Cedar Estate under public heritage law. The argument? Wartime origins justified cultural protection status. On paper, preservation. In reality, shared oversight. A crack in William's exclusive claim. November 2025 escalated things further. A private reception near Henley. Heritage donors, food critics, art historians, described later by one guest as a trial balloon for a public-private stewardship model that would bypass traditional succession lines. William didn't erupt publicly. He declined participation quietly. Firmly. 3 weeks later, he activated the covenant clauses. By the time Camilla and Tom realized the walls had closed, it was already done. The Windsor Cultural Legacy Center died before it could lay its first brick. On February 3rd, inside palace corridors, it wasn't just disappointment, it was realization. The Queen had anticipated the gourmet retreats, the rebranding, the donor networks. Years before they materialized, she had built legal weapons into the trust. And William signed but this was only the first explosion, because as Cedar locked into place, another transfer surfaced. Northacre Hall. A 12,200-acre heritage property with agricultural revenue and licensing rights stretching back 800 years. Days before her passing in September 2022, the Queen had quietly reclassified Northacre from shared crown asset to personal sovereign holding, allowing it to bypass institutional succession entirely. That Appendix R3 carried her directive, let Northacre remain with the child who bears the burden of our future. That child was William. Camilla and Tom had reportedly lobbied to integrate Northacre into a massive culinary heritage venture backed by international investors. Boutique hotel, heritage cooking school, luxury Windsor destination day feasibility study valued licensing rights alone at $48 million over 10 years. But the Queen had moved first. When Tom allegedly attempted a lease inquiry on part of the estate, the Duchy legal team shut it down, citing inheritance protections installed in 2022. By sunrise February 3rd, Northacre belonged solely to William. And inside the palace, whispers turned icy. Because estate by estate, clause by clause, the Queen hadn't just distributed property, she had drawn a line. And on one side stood legacy. On the other, ambition. If Cedar was the warning shot and Northacre was the territorial lockdown, what happened next was personal. Devastatingly personal. Because by mid-January 2026, the final pieces of Queen Elizabeth II's legal architecture began surfacing. And this time, the estate at the center of it all wasn't just historic, it was emotional. Clarence Hill. Purchased quietly in 1947 by King George VI. Nestled deep in the Chiltern Hills and accessible only by a 4-mile private drive, Clarence Hill had always existed off the books, insulated from Parliament, insulated from press, insulated even from routine crown accounting. It was not flashy. It was not grand in the way Balmoral was grand. It was something else. It was deliberate. When Princess Anne conducted a forensic review of the late Queen's private correspondence inside Windsor's Oak Room in January 2026, she found a folded codicil secured within a weathered leather folio embossed with the name William George. And the words written inside were not vague. They were not ceremonial. I entrust Clarence Hill to my grandson William in full title and spirit, free of encumbrance, free of shadow. Let it remain outside the Crown Estate, immune to politics, immune to scandal. This land is a covenant, not a commodity. Its purpose is to guard the moral line of succession. Immune to scandal, that phrase echoed through palace corridors like a verdict. Because in her final years, the Queen had watched volatility swirl around different branches of the family, media ventures, branding attempts, public controversies. Clarence Hill insiders say was her firewall, a moral buffer, a private compass designed for William and Catherine's future, but Camilla and Tom did not see firewall. They saw opportunity. Camilla reportedly learned of the Clarence Hill transfer on January 20th, 2026. Within hours, legal teams were summoned. Timing mattered. Tom had recently suffered professional setbacks involving publishing disputes and backlash over unauthorized use of royal insignia in his food branding. Clarence Hill wasn't sentimental in their calculations. It was strategic oxygen. By January 23rd, a new entity had been drafted, Hill and Crown Limited. Tom listed as executive director. The proposal? rebrand Clarence Hill into a boutique agricultural and hospitality powerhouse centered on regenerative luxury and royal sustainability. Tom would pivot into the face of a Green Britain aristocratic renaissance that it was sleek, it was modern, it was commercially airtight, and it was 3 weeks too late. The Queen's codicil had been notarized years earlier. The transfer had already been executed quietly into a protected branch of the Duchy of Cornwall Trust. Hill and Crown Limited was drafting blueprints for land it no longer had a legal pathway to touch. Then came January 28th. An anonymous whistleblower forwarded the internal Hill and Crown business deck to the Lord Chancellor's office. Mock-ups of Clarence Hill with corporate logos airbrushed over its historic fade circulated within senior circles. Luxury valuations, investor outlines, branding language that felt more Silicon Valley than Windsor at the backlash inside the palace was immediate. William confronted Camilla during a private lunch at Windsor intended to mark Catherine's recovery. Those close to the room described the exchange as brief and chillingly final. William reportedly told her, "Clarence Hill does not exist to be bottled, branded, or sold. It is the last sanctuary of my grandmother's soul, and I will protect it as I protect my wife and children." Camilla left without finishing her meal. Within 48 hours, Hill and Crown Limited was dissolved, but the Queen had one more lair. Greenheath 500 acres of undeveloped woodland southeast of Forest Lodge. For years, Camilla reportedly assumed it was ceremonial land, unused, peripheral. She was wrong. Attached to Greenheath was a $37 million private trust accumulated through decades of strategic transfers personally approved by the Queen. Invisible money. Silent capital. Waiting. When Tom discovered the existence of the trust, insiders say his strategy shifted from hospitality branding to high-level investor positioning. Wellness centers, Tupai-backed partnerships, media-branded culinary education hubs, but on January 30th, 2026, Princess Anne, acting through Crown Trust Authority, sealed the asset transfer backdated to December 25th. Full rights to land and trust. William. Alongside the documents came something else, a private audio recording from the Queen explaining that Greenheath was to be reserved exclusively for environmental education and child rehabilitation programs under William and Catherine's patronage. No wine labels. No boutique suites. Children. Education. Rehabilitation. Camilla's legal team attempted one last maneuver, suggesting a challenge to the Queen's mental clarity at the time of signing. It was a move so risky it bordered on unthinkable. Within 48 hours, King Charles issued a private warning. Any attempt to undermine the late Queen's will would be treated as sedition against the Crown's memory. He inherited silence, stewardship, and the documented certainty that the sovereign who watched him closest trusted him most. And in the quiet language of sealed covenants, that trust became untouchable.